picture Thanksgiving, you probably think of time with family and friends filled with political debates, inside jokes, and a large meal. Or, if you aren't from the United States, you probably don't think of the holiday at all. But if you are in the United States and you do celebrate, what if the holiday that's based around gratitude and engorgement ended in tragedy? For a Florida family, that's exactly how their 2009 Thanksgiving celebration ended. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Crafty Crimes podcast. I haven't finished the basket from the last episode yet because I've been preoccupied with another project, but I did manage to add 4 or 5 more rows. I want my basket to be fairly big. Because I plan on using it to store yarn and like my active projects. So right now, what I'm doing is just crocheting in a round and adding an increase into every 7th stitch. I'm going to do that for 2 rounds, and then I am going to add an increase in every 8th stitch, do that for 2 rounds, and so on and so forth until the base of my basket is big enough for my liking. So there is a little bit of ruffling in my base. That's just because I added an increase in every 5th stitch for like 4 rounds and was too lazy to go back and frog it. But the ruffling doesn't bother me any, and you're not even really going to be able to tell once the basket is completed and filled. So I'm not going to do anything to fix it, but I just wanted to let you know that in case yours is looking different than mine. If it bothers you, don't do what I did, but that's beside the point. Anyway, I will link the pattern that I'm using as a guide in the description box again. But other than that, let's get started. It's time to learn about the Merhige Thanksgiving Massacre. So grab your crafting supplies and learn about Paul and his crimes with me. This case is going to be pretty sparse on the details of Paul's life before the shooting. For whatever reason, the information just isn't available, and the details are limited when it comes to what was released to the public. So most of this story comes from local news outlets, and just as a warning up top here, there are a lot of names that are going to be thrown around, but I will do my best to specify how everyone is connected. So with that in mind, let's get into it. Michael Merhige was born on July 12th, 1938 in the Miami, Florida area. His wife, Carol Joseph, was born May 21st, 1950. The two married in 1973, and their first child, Paul Michael Merhige, was born September 10th, 1974. Paul is the oldest of 3 children. His 2 sisters, Lisa and Carla, were born on March 29th, 1976. Paul and his sisters grew up in the Miami, Florida area. They attended Gulliver Preparatory Academy in the Pinecrest neighborhood. Paul would be an honor student and play varsity baseball for this school, and then eventually go on to attend the University of Miami. Now, I couldn't find any information as to what he studied in college or what his degree is in, but we do know that he did attend, so there's that. It's also not super clear what Paul got up to after college. He seemingly had a hard time holding down a job or maintaining a serious relationship. In fact, I'm not sure that Paul ever really had a relationship with anyone, but that's just my speculation. But by 1996, when Paul was 20, he was back living with his parents, likely never having lived on his own to begin with. His mother, Carol, largely blamed his mental health issues on his inability to integrate into society. However, while the details of Paul's personal life are sparse, we do know from family testimony that Paul had violent tendencies and previous run-ins with law enforcement. The police would be called to the Merhige's home 10 times between when Paul moved back in 1996 and his arrest in 2010. His only documented arrest occurred in 1998 for a disorderly conduct charge when he was about 23 or 24 years old. And if you're curious, a disorderly conduct charge typically refers to disturbing the peace in some way, excessive yelling, obscene gestures, fighting, and public intoxication. So knowing what we know about Paul, I would guess and say that Paul was being overly aggressive in public, but it's not explicitly stated. Additionally, while there is no definitive timeline given, we also know from testimony that Paul tried to file a restraining order against his sister Carla, but dropped the charges sometime between when he was arrested and the turn of the millennium. Carla, his sister, also filed a restraining order against him in 2006 after Paul threatened to slit her throat, but she ended up dropping those charges later on as well. According to his mother, Paul was hospitalized in 1999 for a suicide attempt. So why do I bring all of this up if there's no conclusive sources to back up all of these claims? Well, because it paints a picture of who Paul is as a person. If these claims are true, then we can see that Paul harbored a deep hatred for his sisters and struggled massively with his mental health. Why did Paul hate his siblings so much? We don't know. Based on a comment he'd make the night of the massacre, I would guess that something happened when he was 15, but I doubt we will ever know for sure. I lost count of my stitches, so give me just a second and I'll be right back. Let's see. There's the double. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's a double. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now that we've established Paul's character, let's talk about the night of the massacre. Jim and Muriel Sitton, cousins of the Merhige family, hosted a Thanksgiving dinner at their home in Jupiter, Florida on November 26th, 2009. Jupiter is a suburb of West Palm Bay with a population of over 60,000. It is about a 20-mile difference between West Palm Bay and Jupiter. Roughly 16 people attended the dinner to include Paul's immediate family, though Paul himself wasn't invited. Carol's brother, Antone, had hosted Thanksgiving the previous year and had told his sister that if she brought Paul to the next year's celebrations, that he would cancel the gathering entirely. Allegedly, Paul hated his uncle almost as much as he hated his sisters. Despite being uninvited, Paul showed up to the dinner celebration. His father, Michael, had given him directions to the sit-in house. The hosts were shocked and enraged when Paul showed up on their doorstep, but they allowed him to enter and join the family anyways. This would be the first time Muriel had seen her cousin Paul in 12 years. Supposedly, Lisa, one of Paul's sisters, and Carol, his mother, had shared a private moment before Paul's arrival where they expressed to one another how relieved they were that Paul wouldn't be attending the festivities because they were scared that he was going to hurt someone. Paul was aloof during the celebration. He didn't eat any of the meal, and while he stood in the room with his family during their Christmas carol sing-along that was a tradition for them, he didn't participate in that either. After the caroling came to a close, Paul stepped outside, grabbed a gun from his car. Upon his return inside, Paul shot his aunt, 76-year-old Raymond Joseph. Her husband, Dr. Antone Joseph, immediately dropped to her side and attempted to save his wife. A bullet grazed the arm of another relative, Clifford Jabara. Paul then opened fire on his twin sisters, Lisa and Carla. Lisa was pregnant with her first child at the time of her death. Both sisters were 33. Lisa's husband, Patrick, was also shot and seriously wounded. He would spend the next 3 months in a medically induced coma before pulling through. The last victim was 6-year-old Michaela Sitton. She was shot 3 times in her bed. Patrick Knight reported seeing Marriage walk into her room, shoot her once, walk out, and then re-enter her room and shoot her 2 more times. He was reported to have said that he waited 20 years to do this. When the first shots were fired, multiple unnamed family members fled in fear and hid outside. After the shooting, Marriage fled the scene and was now a man on the run. Shockingly, this bloody massacre was not the first tragedy to befall the Marriage family. In 1973, a year before Paul was born, Michael's sister, Salwa Abrams, committed a triple murder-suicide. The 45-year-old woman shot and killed her ex-husband in their marital home following a bitter divorce. After shooting her ex-husband, Salwa emptied a revolver into her 14-year-old son, then her 10-year-old daughter. After murdering her entire family, Mrs. Abrams swallowed a bunch of pills and died in the hospital several days later. Now, do I think that the 1973 familicide committed by Paul's aunt had anything to do with his crimes that would take place almost 40 years later? No, I don't. I just thought it was interesting that the same family would experience a tragedy of this magnitude twice in one lifetime. I mean, what are the odds? I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about it in the comment section. Now, a certain level of planning had gone into this massacre. In the months prior, Paul had purchased 4 guns and several hundred rounds of ammo for each and withdrew at least $12,000 in cash. He also had ordered a self-guiding book for assisted suicide and the materials to make that happen. Obviously, he did not commit suicide because there's still more to this tale. He even went as far as to switch the license plate on his car. Paul would spend the next 5 weeks hiding in Long Key, Florida at the Edgewater Lodge. Police in Jupiter offered a $10,000 reward for any information that would lead to Paul's arrest. On December 5th, 2009, Paul Merhige aired on an episode of America's Most Wanted. The owners of the Edgewater Lodge saw the episode and immediately called the police. Merhige was arrested on January 2nd, 2010. When police searched the room, they found receipts showing that Paul had stocked up on enough supplies from a local Kmart to last several more weeks, as well as having paid the motel owners several months in advance, making it clear that Merhige had planned to remain in hiding. Paul's arrest marked the 1,099th arrest from an America's Most Wanted ad. Merhige's arraignment was held on February 2nd, 2010. Because of Paul's well-documented mental health struggles, his defense attorneys decided to try for an insanity plea. At the time of his arrest, Paul was taking Ativan to help manage his OCD. He also had an anxiety disorder, depressive episodes, and suicidal ideations under his belt. And I just want to say, for clarity purposes, that I don't know why his lawyers decided that his use of Ativan was going to come up in the trial. I did a little bit of research on it, and it seems like it's just a suppressant. It's a downer. It's supposed to calm you down and make you sleepy. None of the reported side effects have anything to do with homicidal ideation. So I'm not sure why they're citing his Ativan use specifically to say that he's too mentally ill to understand what he had done. But that was the play that they were going with. Now, this strategy is risky on a good case, and Paul's was not a good one. If this defense wasn't successful, Paul could face the death sentence, which is exactly what the prosecution wanted. With that in mind, Paul Merhige decided to take a plea deal to avoid that fate. He ended up being sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without parole on October 27th, 2011. He is currently being held at Liberty Correctional Institute in Bristol, Florida. At Paul's sentencing, those affected by his crimes were allowed to give statements. Jim Sitton, the dinner's host and the father of the youngest victim, pled on his knees with the judge to give Paul the death sentence, saying, "If someone who kills your child doesn't deserve the death penalty, then who does?" The Sitton family was understandably devastated when the judge decided to honor Merhige's plea deal, but have since publicly made peace with the outcome. But have they really? The 2009 Thanksgiving Massacre left scars for all the families involved, but most especially the Sitton family. In 2011, Jim and Muriel Sitton, along with Patrick Knight and Antone Joseph, filed a negligence lawsuit against Carol and Michael Merhige. The plaintiffs claimed that the Merhiges were criminally responsible for Paul's actions because they knew he was mentally unstable and invited him along to this dinner party anyway. The judge presiding over the case decided that Michael and Carol were not legally responsible for the actions of their adult son. A month after sentencing, Michael and Carol then filed a counter lawsuit against the Sittons, claiming that Paul was only able to open fire because Jim had let him into the home. You can imagine how that countersuit went over. As recently as 2014, the Sittons had attempted to get the 4th District Court to reconsider their earlier ruling and find Michael and Carol guilty on negligence charges. But again, that motion was denied, and it seems like no one has really moved on. But really, how could they? Michael and Carol lost all 3 of their children that day. They will never get to be grandparents, and they've been estranged from a good chunk of their family because of what their son did. Jim and Muriel lost their 6-year-old daughter. Patrick and Antone lost their wives. Paul's selfish actions literally tore the whole family apart. Amazingly, though, there is some good to come out of this story. Jim and Muriel were able to have another child on February 27th, 2012. Natalia Grace was born to her 50-year-old parents. The Sitton family was then able to start the Michaela Joy Sitton Foundation, which provides scholarships for those who want to study music or dance. Jim worked to publish a book little Michaela had been writing before she passed. He had found it on her nightstand in the days following her murder. All the proceeds from that book, The Bears, go straight to the foundation to fund the scholarships. And that, my friends, is the story of the Marriage Thanksgiving Day Massacre. Researching this case left me with a lot of questions, but mostly I want to know what happened when Paul was 15 to make him decide he wanted to kill his whole family. OCD is a terrible disease for sure. I'm not denying that. But I have a hard time buying into that one specific illness being the whole reason behind shooting your family. And based on what we know about the family dynamic, I'm going to take a guess and say that Lisa, Carla, and Antone were the only real intended victims, and that little Michaela was just an afterthought. What do you think? So, this is how my basket's looking now. It's probably about the size of my face. I am going to go ahead and finish this round, and then I will probably start to build it up. Be sure to check out my TikTok to see how it comes along and how it finishes up. But I'm going to work to actively finish it before the next episode so that we can all start a new project together. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to choose kindness where you can, unless you have the option to be kind to Paul Marriage, in which case, fuck that guy. He's awful. And I'll see you guys soon.